Call the member for Macquarie.
Deputy Speaker. Before we had COVID, we had a problem in childcare. Now, let's be realistic. The care of children is the responsibility of both parents, but often the secondary wage earner is a woman, and the family measures the cost of childcare against that second wage. What will it cost to go back to work? What will be lost on childcare? How much better off will I be, or will we be financially once those childcare fees are paid? Will it be worth the mornings trying to get myself and the child out the door? Not the good mornings, not the mornings where your child eats their breakfast and happily wears the shorts that are clean and remembers that today's teddy bear day and pops their bear in the bag. But the bad mornings where nothing goes right, and just as you're about to race out the door, a 3-year-old mashes a banana into your suit, maybe with a grin, maybe with a tantrum. Those mornings, we've all had them and asked ourselves, is this worth the money? I'm 2 decades away from having had those mornings, but women tell me that not much has changed. Kids are still kids, and the system designed by this Prime Minister still incentivises women to work 3 days a week, but no more. They actually lose money for working 4 or 5 days. Before COVID, childcare costs were rising. The government's subsidy system had a 4.6% hike in fees in 2019, when inflation only went up 1.8%. Out-of-pocket costs had soared by 7.2% in the year that we had the last data for. This third-term Liberal government has now overseen a 34% increase in fees, so that childcare costs as much as an extra $3,800 a year. Another major flaw in this government's approach to childcare is that they don't view early education as just that. Play-based education crucial for brain development in the under-5s. Those opposite seem to see it purely as babysitting, but it is so much more than that. Quality early learning is the most effective use of the education dollar. On this side of the House, we see spending on early child learning as an investment, whether that's an investment in the educators who guide the children or investment to fund the child's attendance. On one of these measures, COVID showed us another way. Families were given free childcare. I say from the outset that the model used by the Morrison Government was far from perfect for the childcare centres in the Blue Mountains and Hawkesbury. The sector wasn't consulted about how to keep the doors open and keep their staff employed. There were what I will kindly call unintended consequences that came from not understanding the sector and not bothering to speak with them before announcing to the world that things would change. In fact, they'd change in just a couple of days. And then as further changes occurred, even those were not communicated directly to the sector, but they had to hear about it via the media. Directors of early learning centres went through hell at that time, and along with their workers deserve our thanks for demonstrating the role they play as absolutely essential workers. But for many of the families I've spoken to, aside from some guilt in not paying when they still felt they could, the change was a revelation. This is particularly for women whose work is not necessarily regular, casual workers who might get more work some weeks than others, the workers who need to be flexible to meet their employers' demands, self-employed people whose workload goes up and down. For the first time, to not have to do that calculation in your head about whether it was worth a day's childcare was liberating. People were able to say yes to whatever work was available, and often those people were women. But the liberation was short-lived. Knowing that 200,000 women have lost work in this Morrison recession so far, we know how many we need to see back at work. So let's be plain. The question is, how can people go back to all these promised jobs if they can't afford childcare or if they lose money for working? Women's economic security is best secured when they can work the days and hours that they want, as well as boosting our kids. Investing in early learning boosts workforce participation, and boosting workforce participation increases economic growth. And that's why it's such a surprise that not only was there no plan for social housing in this budget or no plan for aged care, there was no plan for childcare in this budget. When it's such an important piece of the puzzle, it's unbelievable that in $1 trillion they couldn't find a cent for childcare.